This sink weighs 115 pounds according to the website. And we'll set this aside because we need to get our stretcher put in the back. Today here at G4 Designs, we're going to build a farmhouse sink base cabinet. I always like to get these sinks here in my shop, take my own measurements, and be able to construct the cabinet around the sink. They're not all built the same. This one's full depth all the way around. So inside this cabinet, we're actually going to build a floor for this sink to set on. Another reason that's good to get these sinks in your possession is this sink weighs 115 pounds according to the website. And that has kind of made me adjust how I want to build this one. The website also says that it's 33 inches wide, 18 inches front to back, and 10 inches deep. And if we pull a tape measure across it, we're actually 33 5/16 by 18 1/4 by 10 1/16. So had they just got me the part number and I built according to those dimensions, this sink wouldn't have fit because it's wider, for one, than that 33 inches. And then it would actually be sitting above the top of the cabinet. So the countertop would be sitting on top of the sink, but not on the cabinet, creating a void, which would really cause havoc down the road with those different elevations. The countertop could crack eventually. Okay, let's get into the build. We're going to rip this sheet down on the table saw, and the first cut I always make is at 23 1/2. Then we reset the table saw to cut our sheets at 23 1/4, which then our 3/4 inch face frame gets us to 24 inches on our standard cabinet box. So set that sheet aside, then we rip the second sheet down. And we do the same thing to get our heights, where on a full sheet I will make a trim cut at 34 3/4 and then reset the table saw to 34 1/2, which is what I make my standard cabinet boxes at. This sheet was already trimmed down, so we make our cuts at 34 1/2. Then we move over to the bandsaw and cut out our toe kicks at 3 1/2 inches by 3 1/2 inches. And I have a square set up to speed up the process, where we just cut both out at the same time. You can also make that cut with a jigsaw and a square. It's very easy. 3/4 inch dado stack. We set that up at a 1/4 inch depth, and then we set our table saw to cut at 4 15/16 to the top. What that allows us to do is run our 1.5 inch face frame, and we get a 1/16 of an inch lip on the inside of the cabinet. We always want to test fit our piece. I like to check both sides in case one of the sides of the plywood has a little bit of a taper, and I like it really snug so that glue makes full contact. Then we cut our dado into the side panel. We want to cut one from the toe kick end and then one from the back of the cabinet to ensure that we have two opposite sides, a right and a left. If we cut all of our pieces the same, we cannot build both sides of the cabinet. Now we tear down our 3/4 inch stack and just use the two outside blades to give us about a 1/4 inch for our back panel dado. And what I like to do here is set the table saw to cut at 5/8 of an inch to the top of the blade, which gives us about 1/8 of an inch behind our 1/2 inch plywood, which allows us to take out any unstraight walls a little easier. Now what I like to do is just mark the top of the cabinet. It's strictly a reference where that panel is going to be. What we want to do is really take a good measurement from the top of our sink to the bottom of our sink in order to get where our face frame is going to be. So what we'll do is we'll set the sink aside, which is going to be more of a chore than it should be because it weighs so much. And for now, we're done. We'll test fit this later on. Once we get the face frame kind of figured out, we'll get the cabinet constructed. So I need to get a piece of 3/4 inch cut for the floor, a stretcher just for the back, and then our face frame is actually going to hold the front of our cabinet in and out. The next step in this process is getting our carcass kind of constructed, so we need to cut our bottom panel. And I want 35.5 inches outside of cabinet box to outside of cabinet box, and then we overhang the face frame on each side 1/4 inch. That gets us to our 36. So I need to cut a bottom panel that is 34.5 inches, and you're probably questioning that measurement. But we have 1/2 inch outside the dado to the outside of the cabinet box. We take off that 1 inch where we want our 35.5 outside to outside, 1/2 inch on one side to the dado, 1/2 inch on the other side to the dado, that equals 1 inch. So we need 34.5 inch bottom panel. Now that we have that panel cut, the next thing we got to do is run a nice bead of glue down in that dado. Pick which is the nicer side of the panel for the bottom here. Flush out the front. Get our positioning squares on. Bead of glue on the other side. This part can sometimes be a little tricky. It's usually not too bad. There we go. Make sure we're flush there in the front. All we need to do is put on our clamps. We'll rotate this around. You just always want to make sure that we're staying flushed up with our bottom panel to our 2 side panels so that we get good contact with our face frame. Then we'll set this aside because we need to get our stretcher put in the back. Now that we have our stretcher, I like to make them 2 inches thick. It's 3/4 inch material. It's just an offcut from cutting all the boxes. Then what I like to do now is take our pocket holes from the bottom. The only reason I like to do that is because when the cabinets are installed in the homeowner's place before the countertops go on, the pocket holes are all hidden. Now that's just a personal preference. It doesn't matter. Most people aren't even going to know what they're looking at when they see that and would understand that it's just how they're fastened together. But what I like to do now is remove one of these clamps. Set it up here, and we want to be careful now on the back here that we flush up our stretcher with our 1/4 inch dado for the back panel. We don't want to overhang so that our back panel can't slide in, and we don't want to be too far forward so that there's a big gap between the stretcher and the back panel that we have to close up later on. That is just kind of not all that nice to look at. So to make sure we're flush on the top and that we're flush inside the dado here. Cinch it down good, and then run 2 1/4" Craig screws in. And now I said Craig screw, but I get these at Custom Service Hardware. It's out of Wisconsin, I believe. And I order these by the 1,000, and they're just a few cents each. The Craig screws, I believe, don't quote me on this, I haven't bought them in a long time, but they're 10 or 20 bucks for somewhere between 10 and $20, I think, for 100. They're about half the price, maybe even less, depending on how many you buy. I buy them 1,000, I think they're 5 cents or 4.5 cents per screw, whereas the Craig ones are multiple times more expensive than that. And now I didn't put any glue on this joint because it's all pre-finished hardware, and that glue is not really going to hold anyway. What we're going to do now is move on to the face frame. So I'll slide this back out of the way. Like I said about these side panels, I have a bunch of face frame parts already batched out too into my widths and I run 1.5" as vertical stiles, and then all the rails vary. A lot of times on the top and bottom I'm at 1.5", and then everything else that's a drawer separator or a door separator inside the cabinet, that's all 2 1/4. That way we get that 3/4 inch reveal in between all the pieces. So these two vertical stiles, they're both 1.5". We want 36-inch cabinet. So our rails here on our bottom 1.5" piece needs to be 33, and then I need a 2 1/4 inch for the bottom of our sink. That needs to be 2 1/4, and then we're going to put a center door divider that's also 2 1/4 in there. So I need to cut those pieces. So what we're going to start off here is a little trim cut on this piece of hickory. And we slide it over to 33. And we can set the table saw to 2 1/4. We have a rip blade in there. Down 1.5". Now, the nice thing about ordering from Custom Service Hardware is they have multiple different types of screws. Now, when we go plywood to plywood or a real soft wood like pine, we get these coarse threaded screws, and then they're black. And on hardwood, like hickory, like what we're working with right now, I get these, they're called a combination thread. And the coating helps with the splitting. So what we do here is we get all our clamps ready. And what I like to do on my bottom and top pieces is I just run the one pocket screw. Now at the bottom, we run this pocket screw farther away from the bottom, and vice versa. At the top, we put that screw away from the top so that we have as much material above or below the screw as we can. It helps that from splitting out. A little bit of glue. We clamp it that way. We clamp it this way. Keep that thing from moving. Make sure that we're still flushed up down there. One screw there. And then where this one comes, this is the most important measurement we got. And what we're going to have to end up doing is coming in here and cutting out a portion for our sink, because that sink is going to be in to this style a little bit. Now I'm not exactly sure how much yet. We'll have to get this built, and then we'll end up shaving out with the table saw and tuning it up with the chisels. And we want to take an accurate measurement here that we got from the top of the sink down to the bottom of the sink, which is going to sit right on this rail. Now we need to run a center divider for our doors. That dimension on this particular cabinet will be 16 and 15/16. So we'll run a 2 1/4 inch piece right there. But what I like to do is just find center by measuring back and forth. 15 3/8. 15 and 5/16 is going to be dead center. So then we make a mark at 15 and 5/16, which is that's what's center on both ends. Then we can screw that down. And now that we're locked in on this dimension, we can mark how much we need to take out to make our sink fit. We need 33 1/4, so on this particular sink, we don't have to take that much out. Some of them I've had have been in that 34 range, and you end up actually having to take off quite a bit. And we have a full kerf blade on the table saw, so what we're able to do is just take off one blade width off each side, and that should get us to about where we need to be. And I'm not super worried about what this looks like because the sink's going to sit there as long as this line here is straight on the outside, and as long as we're 90 degrees there, we'll be fine. What I like to do after I get the face frame all together like this is we'll go around here and sand all these, make sure that we're flushed up nice. We get rid of any other glue residue, and then we can get clamped onto the cabinet. So next we're going to glue our face frame on, and what I like to do is slide the cabinet off from the edge of the table so that I can get clamps on the top and the bottom, or the front and the back of the cabinet with no interference from the table. What we need to do is test fit the face frame to make sure that we have enough room on the inside of the cabinet to get our 1/2 inch panels that are going to help support the bottom of that sink panel. So what I'm doing here is test fitting it with a 1/2 inch piece of plywood, the same material that the side panels are going to be made out of, and that I'll have a little bit of a lip for my hinge hardware to fasten onto. After I got that all taken care of, we spread some glue out, we clamp the face frame on, making sure that we're even on both sides. We should have a 1/4 inch from the outside of the face frame to the outside of the cabinet box, and about 9/16 inside the face frame to the inside of the cabinet box. Next we'll cut our side panels. We just take our measurements from where the sink cutout is down to the top of the floor of the cabinet, and then from the back of the face frame to the front of our dadoed 1/4 inch groove that our back panel will be.
Here I'm putting pocket holes in panel that the sink will sit on. And we'll go 1 inch from the edge on each corner on the top, every 5 inches from there. And then on the sides, because that's going to be supported by those 1/2 inch panels, I just went 3 inches center of the panel and then 3 inches in again.
Now that our side panels are cut, we can go ahead and brad nail those into the cabinet. What we want to do is make sure that we don't have any extra glue squeeze out from the face frame. If we do have any glue squeeze out, a great way to remove that is just with a wood chisel. And with the pre-finished plywood, it's not bonded to it, so it does scrape out really easy. So we just kind of test those. That one's nice and square. We always want to make sure that we pick the nicest side. If there's any scratches, we want that to go inside. And then we just want to use 4 brad nails because this is only needed to keep this thing from falling over. There's going to be only downward pressure on it. There's not going to ever be any stress on the sides of this to peel those brad nails out, so there's no need for glue. Besides that, the glue's not going to stick with the pre-finished panels anyway. I got 1 inch brad nails in my 16 gauge nailer here. So we hide these as best as we can. So 1 in each back corner. Now we can take our top panel, slide that into place. Turn this around. And the best way to ensure that we get this exactly where we want it is to run a couple of clamps. Sometimes it's a good idea to just run a clamp down, because when we go to put those pocket screws in, it's going to want to push that panel up. So always gotta get out that clamp for the pressure. We grab our combination pocket screws because we are screwing this back panel into obviously a very hard wood in hickory. And now we have 3 screws to hold the side panel into the side of the cabinet. And because it's all plywood, we can use our coarse threaded screws that we use on our softwood and our plywood. Just put some downward pressure on that and snug it up. Now all we have left to do is put on the back panel, so we'll get that cut out here pretty quick. And the back panel, like I said before, is made out of 1/2 inch plywood. And we take our dado stack and cut a rabbet in so that we can slide that 1/2 inch plywood into our dadoed groove here on the side of the cabinet. And how we determine what this back panel is going to be is we hook the top of our stretcher, measure down to the bottom of the floor on the cabinet, which is 30 and 5/16. So we need a 30 and 5/16 tall panel. And then we measure inside of our 3/4 inch dado there, and we need 34 and a half. One more thing that I like to do is always try and test fit this to make sure that we fit really well, and that's perfect. For this, we generally only need the 2 outside blades of the dado stack because we're just cutting in a 1/4 inch rabbet. And because we only have the 2 blades on, we're still able to use the factory throat plate with no dado groove in it. We have to set up a sacrificial fence so that we don't nick up our regular fence. What I like to do is just kind of set that what looks to be flush, and I have my 1/4 inch setup block here. And we just rotate that blade until we're at a 1/4 inch there. It feels about right. And then we take a sacrificial piece as a setup block. So we'll get the dust collector on, turn on the saw. So that's what we're looking for. And then what we are doing is we are coming in here and seeing how well that fits. Now we are able to take our back panel and cut our rabbets in here. We always want to inspect this panel too. If there is a side with scratches on it, we want that side to be the side that gets cut. This side has one little tiny nick right there. We'll rotate this down. Now that we have our rabbets cut, we just slide the panel in place. And if all your cuts were good, it'll slide right down in there. Sometimes we have to push in from the back, down on the bottom there. This panel's got a slight bow in it. There we go. Nice snug fit. We just tap it down in place. What we want to do is make sure that our tops are flush. And what we will do to secure the back panel, we'll put some 1 3/4 screws into this 2-inch stretcher and into this bottom for the sink, and then also into the floor of the cabinet. Next we'll mark out, because we're going to go 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and then we'll mark our 2 inches back here, and then down 3/8 to get right in the center of that plywood. And then we just run our 1 3/4 screws in. And I kind of like to go on the end and then to the middle, just in case we have a bowl in here. And then we're able to not run into an issue all on the very end. Then we just repeat that process. We won't put as many right in where the sink's going to sit, because that part is not going to get the pressure from the screws as what the top and the bottom of the cabinet is, so it's not quite as important to hold it super tight right there. And a neat little trick is just to stick it up on the toe kick. Like the cabinet actually props itself up. Mark the 3/8 over here. A quick little trick you can use is to slide your pencil up, get your finger tight to the bottom, make your mark, and then you'll be able to keep that same depth all the way across just by keeping your finger tight up to the bottom, and you don't have to measure each one of them out. Now how I like to get my dimensions here is we just take the tape measure, run it down until we hit that bottom panel. We're at 10 1/16. So we come down here, we mark 10 3/8. That will get us into the center of our panel. 10 inches is to the top of the panel, then we need to come down 3/8 to get in the center of that 3/4. So what I like to do is we'll come to this 5-inch screw, we'll hit one in the middle, so 17.5 of a 35-inch cabinet, and then we'll come back here to this 5-inch. So we'll mark down here 10 3/8, and then 5, 17.5, 5, 10 3/8. And you really got to make sure that you're holding your drill when you pre-drill these square up and down. Our left and right isn't quite as big a deal because if you're too far down or you're too far up, you're going to scab through the bottom or the top. And there we have it, Farmhouse sink base cabinet. I'm gonna go grit the sink and actually test fit it in here and we'll see how it works. I got the cabinet moved down from the table just to make it a little bit safer to lift this 115-pound sink in there, and we'll see how it fits. There we go. There she is.